Forklifts are used for a wide variety of material handling tasks at many work sites. To prevent accidents and injuries on the job, forklifts must be properly maintained and operated. If you're responsible for maintaining and operating a forklift, you need the appropriate skills, knowledge, and training to do your job safely. In this program, we'll show forklifts being operated at several different work sites, and the safety requirements vary from one site to another. Keep in mind, however, that you'll need to follow the safety requirements that apply to your facility. A forklift is a piece of industrial equipment that uses hydraulics and mechanical power to lift loads so they can be moved easily. Many different kinds of forklifts are available to meet a variety of needs. In this part, we'll examine different ways in which forklifts can be classified, and we'll see some of the most widely used types of forklifts for different working conditions. Forklifts are often classified by how they're powered. They can be powered manually, by internal combustion engines, or by electric batteries. Forklifts that are powered by engines are usually operated only in open, well-ventilated areas or outdoors. If an engine-powered forklift were operated in an enclosed area, the exhaust fumes might become trapped in the area and create a health hazard for personnel. The fumes could also damage or contaminate perishable loads. To avoid the hazards that exhaust fumes create, electric forklifts are commonly used in enclosed areas. Forklifts can also be classified by whether they're designed to be used primarily indoors, outdoors, or both indoors and outdoors. A low-lift forklift is designed to raise loads slightly, generally about 6 inches, so that they can be moved to a new location. A high-lift forklift is typically used to raise loads several feet, so they can be stacked. Some forklifts have extendable mast sections that enable them to stack loads on high storage racks. Other forklifts that are designed primarily for loading and unloading vehicles have short masts that allow lifting in areas with low ceilings or other overhead obstructions. The term forklift truck is often used when referring to a vehicle that has a vertical lifting device or mast assembly. The characteristics of this particular straddle stacker are that it straddles the load to be lifted, and compared to some other types of forklifts, it has a shorter overall length to maneuver in narrow aisles. When loads must be moved from one location to another, but not stacked, pallet jacks are commonly used. Pallet jacks can be moved manually, or they can be powered by electric motors. The type of motorized pallet jack seen here is often referred to as a walkie, because the operator walks along with the pallet jack to guide and control it. In workplaces where relatively long distances must be covered, an operator may use a motorized pallet jack that has a platform on it. The platform allows the operator to stand on the jack as it's being operated. These pallet jacks are often called riders or walkie riders. A forklift is a piece of industrial equipment that can be used to move heavy loads. Although different types of forklifts are designed for use in different situations, all forklifts have certain features in common. For instance, forklifts have hydraulic systems that enable them to lift heavy loads. The hydraulics are used to operate the forklift's elevating assembly. A typical elevating assembly on a forklift truck includes a carriage with adjustable forks and an extendable mast. The mast usually has a load backrest to support and stabilize the load during transport. The backrest also prevents objects from falling backwards onto the operator. The hydraulic system's lift cylinder is used to raise and lower the elevating assembly, and a tilt cylinder is used to move the mast backward and forward. Forklifts also have devices that control their operation. For instance, this motorized pallet jack is steered with a handle. The other controls for the pallet jack are usually located on the handle or at the handle end of the vehicle. The controls on forklift trucks typically include a steering wheel, a parking brake, an accelerator pedal, a brake pedal, a power switch that turns the engine or the motor on or off, a directional control lever, and lift and tilt control levers. A forklift with a power shift or an automatic transmission usually has an inching control pedal or inching pedal. The inching pedal provides precise control of movements when the operator is maneuvering a load. Pushing part of the way down on the inching pedal allows the forklift to creep forward slowly, and pushing the pedal all the way down stops the forklift. At the same time, the engine maintains a higher speed to keep the hydraulic system operating properly. Depending on its features, a forklift truck may also have additional control levers for auxiliary functions. For example, this forklift has a lever that's used to control side-to-side movements of a side-shifting carriage that's attached to the mast assembly. Other important features on a forklift truck are safety equipment such as a lap belt, lights, a horn, and an overhead guard. The overhead guard is designed to protect the forklift operator from falling objects. It does not, however, provide rollover protection. When a job involves loading or unloading a truck, a forklift with a low collapsed height is most useful because of the low clearance to the top of the truck. Also, a high free lift would be helpful when stacking or unstacking items without being able to extend the mast in areas with low ceilings. On the other hand, stacking loads on warehouse racks may require a forklift with a high maximum fork height. In this part, we'll go over some fundamentals that apply to forklift operation. Exactly how to operate a forklift can vary from one vehicle to another, so you'll also need to become familiar with the specifics for the forklifts that you'll be using. Take the time to read the operator's manuals, and be sure to follow your company's forklift operating procedures. Let's begin our overview with the forks that are used for lifting loads. Normally, the wider the forks are set under a load, the more stable the load will be as it's handled. So, before a load is lifted, you may need to spread the forks apart so they'll support the load securely. On this forklift, the hydraulic system's lift cylinder is controlled by a lift lever, which is used to raise and lower the forks and the mast sections through a series of chains and pulleys. The tilt cylinder is controlled by a tilt lever, which is used to tilt the mast backward and forward. The mast is generally tilted backward to help support and stabilize a load during transport. The mast is usually tilted forward to help set a load down or to pick up a load. Most other controls on a forklift truck, such as the parking brake, the accelerator pedal, the brake pedal, and the steering wheel, are similar in function and operation to the controls on a car or a truck. But, as we said, not all forklifts are operated alike. For instance, when you're operating any type of pallet jack, you use the handle to steer the vehicle. The operating controls for a walkie or a rider type of pallet jack are usually located on the handle or at the handle end of the vehicle. The handle of a walkie or a rider can also be used as a brake. Typically, if the handle is released to its vertical position, or if it's pushed down, it applies the brakes and stops the vehicle. One feature that applies to the operation of many forklifts is rear wheel steering, with the vehicle's fixed wheels up front. If a forklift uses rear wheel steering, the rear end of the forklift tends to swing wide when making sharp turns. So, it's usually easier to drive the forklift forward into a tight space than to back it into the space. Rear wheel steering can take some getting used to. At first, it may seem easier to back up than to go forward, because the wheels used for steering are then in the lead as they are on a car. Maneuvering a forklift with rear wheel steering is a lot easier if you follow 4 basic tips. First, when you turn a corner as you're driving forward, start close to the inside of the turn. This allows for the forklift's normal tendency to pivot on its inside front wheel as it turns. It also allows enough room for the rear of the forklift to swing around in the clear. If you try to make the turn too wide, the rear of the forklift may not be able to complete the turn. The second tip is that when you're turning within an aisle to pick up a pallet, start as wide as you can. This will allow you to turn fully so that you can address the pallet squarely. Also, remember to keep a check on the rear of the forklift to avoid running into the opposite side of the aisle. The third tip is to back into the turn when you're turning around. This gives you clear vision when you start making the turn, saves extra maneuvering, and allows you to pull forward out of the turn. The last tip involves driving over bridge plates or dock boards. These are pieces of metal that are used to bridge the gap between a loading dock and a truck, a van, or a rail car. In most cases, when you're driving a forklift into a vehicle, you should go straight over the bridge plate. However, if the vehicle is a railroad car, the bridge plate may have to be wide enough to allow you to go over it safely at an angle. You see, railroad cars are narrow. If you go in straight with some forklifts, there may not be room enough to turn to pick up or put down the load without running into the sides of the car. In this part, we're going to cover some general safety considerations that are associated with maneuvering forklifts at a work site. Working safely begins with your personal preparedness. Wear the appropriate clothing and use the required personal protective equipment based on the hazard assessment that was done for the job and the work site. Most operator injuries happen outside the forklift's framework. To prevent being thrown from the vehicle, wear your lap belt. Also, keep all parts of your body within the framework of the forklift, which is designed to protect you from injuries. Maintaining safe control over your forklift requires alertness as well as good vision and hand-eye coordination. Fatigue, sickness, and some medications can affect your ability to perform your work safely. So, make sure that you're up to the job before you begin your shift. Being prepared means knowing what to do if an accident occurs. With most forklift trucks, if you lose control of the vehicle and it starts to tip over, don't jump out and try to get clear. Instead, hang on and stay with the forklift. You should stay with the forklift because you could get hit or pinned by the overhead guard if you try to jump out. Your chances of not being seriously injured are better if you stay with the forklift. Safe forklift operation requires constant awareness of obstacles and hazards, and you must know your forklift's working dimensions to help you avoid hitting things as you operate the forklift. On the job, you'll usually operate your forklift around other vehicles and pedestrians. This can create potentially dangerous situations. In fact, it's the cause of most forklift accidents that involve injuries. Following some common sense traffic safety guidelines can help you avoid accidents. For example, when you're backing up, stay alert for obstacles and other hazards. Drive slowly enough so you can stop safely or negotiate a turn without tipping. Be sure that you have the good visibility you need to drive safely. If the load is too high to see around, drive in reverse with the load trailing. Whenever you come to a blind corner or a doorway, check for oncoming traffic. After you check for oncoming traffic at a blind corner or a doorway, sound your horn before going on. Always be aware of pedestrians. Two of the most common and most serious types of accidents are running into a pedestrian and crushing a pedestrian between the forklift and another object. When you approach pedestrians, sound your horn. Proceed with caution only after you're sure that they're aware of you and your path is clear. It's also important for pedestrians to be familiar with the forklifts and other vehicles used in the work area. Pedestrians should always yield the right-of-way to a vehicle or make sure that the operator of the vehicle has yielded the right-of-way to them before proceeding. A pedestrian should never distract a forklift driver, stand on or underneath the forks or the load, or jump onto a forklift just for the ride. If you operate a manually powered pallet jack or a walkie, you're also a pedestrian. It's generally a good idea to walk to one side in front of the load. This helps you maintain control, so you won't get caught between the load and another object. Also, be careful to maintain a reasonable speed, especially when you're working around obstacles and maneuvering a pallet jack into a tight space like an elevator. If you lose control of the load in these situations, the load might crush you before you could get it stopped. In this situation, the weight involved and the restricted visibility are especially critical factors. If you must use an elevator when you're operating a forklift truck, check the elevator's weight capacity before driving on. The elevator must be able to support the forklift, the load, and you safely. Then, after checking for proper clearances, drive straight onto the elevator, forks first if possible. Tilt the mast to its vertical position and lower the forks to the floor. Place all controls in neutral, set the parking brake, and turn the forklift off before you start the elevator. Before you leave the elevator, check for obstacles, pedestrians, and proper clearances. Then, sound your horn. And ease the forklift off of the elevator until it's clear. When it's time to park your forklift, park in an area designated for that purpose. Don't let your forklift become an obstacle. All aisles, stairways, doors, exits, and emergency equipment must be kept free of obstructions. When you're ready to leave the forklift, lower the forks to the floor and tilt the mast forward. Engage the parking brake and turn the forklift off. We've covered several of the basic safety considerations that apply to forklift operation. There are many additional considerations that involve how to handle loads safely. These are covered in the section of this program called Forklift Stability and Loads. For now, though, try answering some questions on maneuvering a forklift safely at a work site. We've covered several of the basic safety considerations that apply to forklift operation. There are many additional considerations that involve how to handle loads safely. These are covered in the section of this program called Forklift Stability and Loads. In this topic, we've examined ways in which forklifts can be classified, and we've seen various types of forklifts. We've identified the major features of forklifts, and we've covered the basics of how a forklift is operated. We've also gone over some traffic safety considerations that apply to forklift operation. To check your understanding of what we've covered, try answering a few practice questions. Forklift inspections must be performed on a regular basis. The forklift manufacturer's schedule of recommended routine or planned maintenance is designed to keep the vehicle working properly. Following this schedule, which is usually based on the vehicle's total hours of operation, should help minimize unexpected downtime. You should also take a few minutes at the beginning of each shift to check out your forklift before putting it to work. In this example, a forklift operator is making a startup inspection of an electrically powered forklift. He begins the inspection with a visual examination of the forklift. He looks for any obvious signs of damage that could prevent the vehicle from being used safely. He checks the hour meter on the dashboard to verify that the forklift isn't due for routine maintenance. If it were, he would report this fact and, if possible, use another forklift to work the shift. Next, he checks the battery charge for the power system. First, he makes sure that the parking brake is on and the forks are down. The operator does this to prevent any accidental movement of the forklift. Then the operator turns the key to the on position so that the battery gauge will register the amount of charge. In this case, the gauge indicates that the battery is fully charged, but if the charge were low, the battery would need to be recharged and the operator would have to use another forklift during this shift. Next, the operator checks the hydraulic system. He looks under the forklift for signs of leaking hydraulic fluid. He also checks the hoses leading to the hydraulic cylinders for leaks, cracks, crimps, excessive wear, or other damage. And he checks the condition and the level of the hydraulic fluid in the reservoir with the dipstick. If the fluid is cloudy or milky, it's contaminated and it should be replaced. If the fluid appears in good condition but the level is slightly low, the reservoir may simply need to be topped off with additional hydraulic fluid. But if the fluid level is very low or it's slightly low on repeated inspections, the operator should check the system for leaks. He may need to report the condition and have repairs made to correct the problem. The operator must also check the battery electrolyte. If the electrolyte level is low or if its specific gravity is off, the battery may not charge and discharge properly. In addition to checking the electrolyte, the operator also checks the battery for cracks, leaks, or signs of corrosion on the battery box, terminals, or cables. Be careful when you're checking the battery. It's a shock hazard, and battery electrolyte is a powerful corrosive that gives off explosive hydrogen gas. So always wear the appropriate personal protective equipment when you're checking a battery. And work only in open, well-ventilated areas where no smoking is permitted. You also need to know where the nearest eye wash station and sink are. If you splash electrolyte on yourself, immediately flush the area with water and call for help. These fluids include engine oil, transmission oil, engine coolant, and fuel. If the forklift uses propane gas as fuel, you should follow the manufacturer's guidelines to make sure that the gas cylinder is in good condition and has enough fuel. When you check a propane gas cylinder, keep in mind that the gas is under pressure in the cylinder. In addition, escaping propane gas is very cold, and it can easily cause frostbite on exposed skin. It also creates a fire hazard. So take the appropriate safety precautions. With any type of forklift, you should examine the structural parts for signs of damage, looseness, or unauthorized alterations. Check the forks and the load backrest to make sure that they're in good condition and that there are no missing or loose parts. The forklift's tires should also be examined. Some forklifts have pneumatic or air-filled tires. Some have tires that are filled with a cushioning foam, and others have solid tires. Operating with damaged tires might cause a load to vibrate and shift as the forklift moves. If the forklift has pneumatic tires, also check and correct the tire pressure if necessary. Examine the forklift's overhead guard to make sure that it's secure and in good condition. Check other safety equipment such as lap belts, horns, and lights to make sure that they're operating properly. Remove any trash or debris that you find in the forklift to prevent it from obstructing or jamming moving parts. Also, check the forklift's data plate to make sure that it's in good condition and clearly legible. It contains information that's important to a forklift operator. After you complete the visual check, you can proceed to make an operational check of the forklift. After turning the forklift on, one thing that needs to be checked is the operation of the parking brake. With the parking brake still set, make sure that the brake doesn't allow the vehicle to creep when the transmission is engaged. Then manipulate the controls to raise, tilt, and lower the forks and the mast. Each movement should be smooth. Nothing should bind or stick. You should also check the steering mechanism and the foot brake as you drive forward and in reverse. The steering should be smooth, with minimal free play in the steering wheel. The brake should also operate smoothly without binding to bring the forklift to a complete stop with no creeping. If the vehicle passes all the recommended startup checks, you can put the forklift into normal service. You should also perform certain inspections while the forklift is in use. For instance, you must remain alert so that you can detect anything that seems to be abnormal, such as unusual vibrations, sluggish controls, or unusual noises. If you detect a problem, report it immediately and remove the forklift from service. Don't try to do just one more job or get through the day. A forklift is too powerful and the loads are too heavy to take a chance. Usually, routine inspections are also performed after a shift has been completed and the forklift has been shut down. In addition, the forklift is often cleaned at this time since it's easier to examine a clean forklift. In short, trouble-free forklift operation doesn't just happen. Careful inspections must be performed on a regular basis. Most forklifts must either be recharged or refueled periodically, depending on the type of forklift. For example, the charge level for an electric forklift is usually checked after each shift. If the charge is lower than required for the next day or the next shift, you should drive the forklift to the charging area and recharge the battery. Begin by making sure that all of the battery vent caps are tightly sealed to minimize the amount of hydrogen gas that escapes during charging. Then, plug the battery into the correct charger for your forklift's battery. You should only use the correct charger because a charger that has too high a voltage can damage the battery, but a charger with too low a voltage can't provide adequate charging. The charger plug and the mating receptacle on the forklift are often keyed together so that the mating receptacle won't fit with an incorrect charger. During charging, keep the battery compartment cover open to dissipate heat and any hydrogen gas that may escape from the battery cells. Never charge a battery unless it's necessary. Batteries are designed for a limited number of charges, and plugging in unnecessarily can drastically shorten the useful life of a battery. Since overcharging can also damage a battery, many chargers turn off automatically when the battery is fully charged. Even so, always make sure that the charger is off before you unplug it from the forklift. It's important to make sure the charger is off before you unplug it because a charger that's still turned on may create a spark when it's unplugged, and the spark could ignite any hydrogen gas that's present. If the forklift has an internal combustion engine, it must be refueled. Because most fuels are highly combustible or can give off hazardous fumes, refueling should only be done in an open, well-ventilated area. Smoking in the area must be strictly prohibited. If the fuel used is propane, the forklift should be refueled according to the manufacturer's guidelines. This often involves replacing a nearly empty gas cylinder with a fully charged one. Handle the cylinders carefully and be sure to take the necessary safety precautions, such as personal protection against frostbite that can be caused by escaping propane gas. In this topic, we've seen some checks that are usually made during forklift inspections, and we've talked about basic concerns associated with recharging electric forklifts and refueling forklifts that have internal combustion engines. Now, try answering a couple of practice questions. To operate a forklift safely, you need to know something about the balance or stability of a forklift and how the weight of the load and the movement of the forklift affect this balance. When handling loads, a forklift is most stable when a load doesn't exceed a specified maximum size and weight, and when the load is carried only a few inches off the floor with the mass tilted back. In addition, a forklift will be more stable if it carries the load across a level surface. Any dynamic force, such as movement, can affect a forklift's stability, even on a smooth, level surface. On a level surface, weight transference isn't ordinarily a problem when you're operating an unloaded forklift at safe speeds. But maneuvering on an incline or slope, such as a ramp, can pose a real concern for both loaded and unloaded forklifts. A slope directly affects the center of gravity by moving it toward the bottom of the slope. So, when you must negotiate a slope, such as this ramp, with an unloaded forklift, move straight forward going down the ramp, and straight backward going up. This way, the center of gravity is always shifted forward, toward the center of the forklift and the wider area of the stability triangle, not farther backward toward the triangle's narrow apex. A loaded forklift is more stable when it's driven forward up a ramp and backed down. In other words, keep the load pointed up the slope. This way, the effects of the slope and the weight of the load are counterbalanced, so the center of gravity remains within the stability triangle. Of course, you should never attempt to make a turn on a ramp or slope of any kind. Depending on the angle of the slope and the forklift's center of gravity, you may make it or you may not. Don't take the chance. Also, keep the forks tilted back and raise slightly to clear the bottom of the ramp. Finally, one exception to three-point forklift suspension that we should note is the straddle stacker. Its rear wheels are separately mounted, so the vehicle has a 4-point suspension. But since a load is carried and lifted between and slightly behind the front wheels, a straddle stacker is a little less likely than other forklifts to tip forward as the load is lifted. To prepare to lift the load, position the forklift so that the forks address the load squarely. Then, if necessary, position the forks so they're spread as wide as practical for the load that's being lifted. Next, raise the forks so that they're just high enough to slip into the pallet and move the mass to its vertical position. Ease the forklift forward until the forks are as far into the pallet as they'll go. The pallet and load should contact the backrest to stabilize the load. Don't run into the pallet or try to push it across the floor. This could damage the pallet and the load as well as the forklift. The load should be carried as close to the floor as possible. So, raise the forks just high enough off the floor to keep the pallet clear of rough spots or obstacles. Then, tilt the mass back to rest the load against the backrest. This will help to support and stabilize the load as it's moved. Make sure that you have good visibility as you move the load to its new location. If the load is too high to see around, drive the forklift in reverse with the load trailing. Drive at a speed that's slow enough to enable you to negotiate turns without tipping and to allow you to stop safely. Also, don't forget that weight transference, traffic safety, and maintaining proper clearances are important factors in moving a load safely. When you reach the new location, maneuver the forklift so that the load addresses the storage position squarely. Then, raise the load to a height that's slightly higher than where the load is to be placed, in this case, the top of a stack. Keeping the mass tilted back, ease the forklift forward until the load is directly over the top of the stack. Take your time and be careful. Neatness counts. A neat, square stack is usually a safe one. It's less likely to fall over or give way as it's built higher. Once the load is directly over the stack, tilt the mass to its vertical position so that the load is square with the top of the stack. Then lower the load into place. When you're sure that the load is stable, lower the forks slightly to disengage them from the pallet. Then, carefully back away until the forks are clear. Next, lower the mast and lower the forks until they just clear the floor. Then you can go back to get your next load. Never raise or lower the forks while you travel, turn, or maneuver into position. As you work, make sure that you don't allow the forklift and load to create a hazard or obstruction, even temporarily. If loads are to be stacked on top of each other, rather than stacked on racks, keep in mind that you may not be able to stack some materials as high as others. Also, remain alert for special directions and conditions for how each type of load should be handled. Directions can be given verbally, or they can be written on packing or shipping documents or packing cases. In this topic, we've covered the principles of forklift stability and how to handle loads safely with a forklift. Now, try answering a couple of practice questions. There are many types of forklifts and different methods of forklift operation. The test you're about to take is based only on the examples and techniques presented in this program and does not account for variations that may exist. When loads must be moved from one location to another, but not stacked, pallet jacks are commonly used. Pallet jacks can be moved manually, or they can be powered by electric motors. The type of motorized pallet jack seen here is often referred to as a walkie because the operator walks along with the pallet jack to guide and control it. Not all forklifts are operated alike. For instance, when you're operating any type of pallet jack, you use the handle to steer the vehicle. The operating controls for a walkie or a rider type of pallet jack are usually located on the handle or at the handle end of the vehicle. The handle of a walkie or a rider can also be used as a brake. Typically, if the handle is released to its vertical position, or if it's pushed down, it applies the brakes and stops the vehicle. When it's time to park your forklift, park in an area designated for that purpose. Don't let your forklift become an obstacle. All aisles, stairways, doors, exits, and emergency equipment must be kept free of obstructions. When you're ready to leave the forklift, lower the forks to the floor and tilt the mast forward. Engage the parking brake and turn the forklift off. Next, the operator checks the hydraulic system. He looks under the forklift for signs of leaking hydraulic fluid. He also checks the hoses leading to the hydraulic cylinders for leaks, cracks, crimps, excessive wear, or other damage. And he checks the condition and the level of the hydraulic fluid in the reservoir with the dipstick. If the fluid is cloudy or milky, it's contaminated and it should be replaced. If the fluid appears in good condition, but the level is slightly low, the reservoir may simply need to be topped off with additional hydraulic fluid. But if the fluid level is very low or it's slightly low on repeated inspections, the operator should check the system for leaks. He may need to report the condition and have repairs made to correct the problem. If the charge is lower than required for the next day or the next shift, you should drive the forklift to the charging area and recharge the battery. Begin by making sure that all of the battery vent caps are tightly sealed to minimize the amount of hydrogen gas that escapes during charging. Then, plug the battery into the correct charger for your forklift's battery. You should only use the correct charger, because a charger that has too high a voltage can damage the battery, but a charger with too low a voltage can't provide adequate charging. The charger plug and the mating receptacle on the forklift are often keyed together so that the mating receptacle won't fit with an incorrect charger. During charging, keep the battery compartment cover open to dissipate heat and any hydrogen gas that may escape from the battery cells. Never charge a battery unless it's necessary. Batteries are designed for a limited number of charges, and plugging in unnecessarily can drastically shorten the useful life of a battery. Since overcharging can also damage a battery, many chargers turn off automatically when the battery is fully charged. Even so, always make sure that the charger is off before you unplug it from the forklift. It's important to make sure the charger is off before you unplug it, because a charger that's still turned on may create a spark when it's unplugged, and the spark could ignite any hydrogen gas that's present. Ease the forklift forward until the forks are as far into the pallet as they'll go. The pallet and load should contact the backrest to stabilize the load. Don't run into the pallet or try to push it across the floor. This could damage the pallet and the load, as well as the forklift.